Hello, my name is Angela Broaddus, and I am a 5th grade science teacher here in Maryland. And today's video is on how to create an interactive and engaging 5E science lesson using Google Slides and Nearpod. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into part 1 of today's video. So the very first thing I'm going to do is have my Google Slides open, and I'm going to go ahead and select Add-ons, select Nearpod, and select Open Nearpod. And then I'm going to go ahead and select Go to Nearpod. And the purpose of today's video is so that I can walk you through my 5E science lesson and show you the various activities and assignments that I have incorporated within this lesson. So let's go ahead and dive into the lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select Preview. And we're going to go ahead and preview each slide within this lesson. So before we even get started, for those of you guys who are not familiar, in Prince George's County, we use a 5E lesson plan when it comes to creating our science lessons. And if you are not familiar with what the 5Es are, the 5Es are engagement, exploration, explanation, elaboration, and evaluation. And as we come across each of the 5Es, I'll go ahead and provide you with a description of each E, and I'll go ahead and provide you with more of an explanation for the different activities that I'm doing, and I will literally walk you through every activity and every assignment. And the purpose of me doing so is so that you can generate ideas for yourself that you can utilize within your own lessons. And the amazing thing is this. Even though this video is geared towards creating a 5E lesson for science, a lot of these activities you can adapt to any other content area because science is so transdisciplinary. So if you teach reading, if you teach social studies, even if you teach math, this video is still relevant to you. So let's go ahead and start the video. So the very first slide that you guys see is my welcome slide. And every lesson is going to have a welcome slide. It will have the date of that lesson. It will also have my name so that students can get familiar with my name and with who I am. Also, on every welcome slide, students will always see a reminder reminding them to fill out the attendance tracker in Google Classroom. And if you would like more information about what the attendance tracker is and what it looks like, you can feel free to watch one of my other videos on the attendance tracker, which I will drop in the description box below. But essentially, the attendance tracker delegates the responsibility of recording attendance to the students. So this will work primarily really well with students in grades 3 through 5. It can even work with students in grades as low as kindergarten. And of course, it will clearly work with middle school and high school students. I have my Bitmoji character telling the class good morning and asking them how they're doing. And I also have on my laptop the virtual classroom norms and expectation, and I would have a link to the virtual data wall. Now, the virtual data wall is probably one of my favorite components. I am a data-driven teacher. I use data to build intrinsic motivation within my students. So one thing that the students will be able to see at the beginning of the year is their data from last year. And I'm going to use their data to help the students craft a SMART goal for themselves. And of course, I will create a virtual data wall video. And when I do so, I'll go ahead and mention the details in regards to the virtual data wall, SMART goals, and all of that. Let's go to the next slide. On the next slide are my norms and expectations for a virtual classroom setting, and we will go through these norms and expectations at the start of every lesson. And the reason why we're doing this is because if we were in a brick and mortar building, that's the same exact thing I would do for the first 2 months of school every single day. And the point of me doing that is, one, I'm really huge on classroom management, and I believe that if the expectations are clear at the very beginning, it sets you up for success for the rest of the school year. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So these are the Zoom expectations. and we will review them so that they are aware of what is expected prior to us starting our live lesson. Let's go on to the next slide. So the next slide, as you can see, is a poll. And this poll is just assessing how the students are doing. And the reason for this poll is that I want to be very intentional to monitor and check in on my students' mental and emotional health. And the reason for that is due to the fact that, one, we have been in quarantine for so long due to COVID-19, and a lot of students have experienced various forms of trauma from the loss of a loved one or a parent due to COVID, or even a parent or both parents losing their job as a result of COVID. And so I want to be very conscientious. I want to be very mindful of that. And I want to check in on how my students are doing. Why should we even care, Angela? Why is that important? Well, one thing that I am a firm believer of is this. If a child can see that you are emotionally interested in them as a person, you have already won them for the rest of the school year. And as a result, you shouldn't see any difficulties when it comes to behavior and when it comes to their academics. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be hiccups. There won't be hiccups here and there as it pertains to academics. But I know for a fact that you would have automatically won that student over because they know that you care and you value them as a person. And this next slide that you're going to see, this open-ended question, is a follow-up to the last slide. So students weren't feeling happy or excited. It's me providing the students with an opportunity to explain why they feel the way they feel. And I am not naive. I am very much aware that some students may not be honest about their initial responses, or they may not feel like opening up. But the point of this slide is to always provide students with a space to be able to open up and to express why they feel the way they feel. Maybe they feel the way they feel because their parents lost a job. Maybe they feel the way they feel because their parents are getting into arguments. Whatever the case may be, it's providing a space for the students to share what's going on with them. And then, of course, being able to follow up appropriately and either providing them with additional help via connecting them with a guidance counselor, or just giving them words of encouragement, or just helping boost their self-esteem depending on the situation. This next slide goes ahead and talks about our lesson objective. And so before I can even go ahead and address our lesson objective, I need to state this. In Prince George's County, all science lessons are based on the next generation science standards, and all science lessons are phenomenon driven. So what is a phenomenon? A phenomenon is an observable event that happens in nature or can be man-made. And the purpose of a phenomenon is to engage students with the science and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, and the cross-cutting concepts that revolve around each performance expectation within the next generation science standards. All right, Angela, I'm pretty new to the next generation science standards. Can you say that in plainer English? Cool. Think of the next generation science standards as the Common Core standards for science. Did that help? Okay, I hope that did. So let me go ahead and show you the performance expectation from the next generation science standard that this lesson is based off of. So right here, I have a tab open, like you see, and the performance expectation that the lesson that we're going through is based off of is 4-PS4-1. And it states, develop a model of waves to describe patterns in terms of amplitude and wavelength, and that waves can cause objects to move. The science and engineering practices associated with the following PEs, including the one that I just read, are developing and using models and constructing explanations and designing solutions. The disciplinary core ideas that the PE is based off of or based on are wave properties, electromagnetic radiation, information technologies and instrumentation, and optimizing the design solution. But for the purposes of our lesson, we are focusing on the disciplinary core ideas of wave properties. And then lastly, the cross-cutting concepts are patterns and cause and effect. Now, some of you guys may be wondering, Angela, I thought you taught 5th grade. Yes, I do teach 5th grade. However, in Prince George's County, we are instructed to teach 4th quarter concepts from last spring within the first 3 weeks of school through a document that was provided to us that was called a continuity learning guide or bridging the gap guide. It takes on various names. And the purpose of that is just to ensure that the students have a solid foundation on the concepts that were taught on in 4th quarter before we launch into the 1st quarter concepts within our specific grade level. Now, there are some of you who are very familiar with the continuity plan for 5th grade, and you're saying, Angela, I thought that we started on information transfer. Yes, you are absolutely correct. We are supposed to be starting on information transfer. However, when I look at the data of my students, I know that they need a more solid foundation on waves. And so we're just taking one step back, focusing on waves for this lesson, and then we're going to transition immediately into information transfer. So that being said, I know that was very long. So that being said, we're here back to our lesson objective. And you may be wondering, why did I take the time to go ahead and talk about NGSS and the performance expectations and the SEPs, the DCIs, the CCCs associated with the performance expectation for this lesson? Well, when you create a science lesson, especially in Prince George's County, we are instructed to make our lesson objectives 3-dimensional. So they should reflect the SEPs, the DCIs, and the CCCs for that performance expectation. And if you look at my lesson objectives, exploring the properties and characteristics of waves, that is this DCI on wave properties. If you look at the rest of the sentence, it says, and the patterns they create. Patterns, that falls under the cross-cutting concept. And then lastly, if we look at this other lesson objective, use models to learn about the ways in which waves create motion through the transfer of energy. That automatically hits on developing and using models, the science and engineering practice. And what you also don't see is that there are activities within this lesson that also touch on constructing explanations. So I do need to go back and incorporate that into my lesson objective, but I did want to make sure that you were aware of that. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this next slide is simply a slide on the class schedule, so the students are aware of what the class schedule is, and it includes the time frames for each section of the 5E. After the first 2 weeks of school, I will go ahead and properly reassess what worked and what didn't work, and I may adjust the timings as needed. Alrighty. And before we move on, you may also be wondering, especially if you don't teach in Prince George's County, why we have this independent assignments MISA preparation. So if you are not aware, in Maryland, students in the 5th grade take the Maryland Integrated Science Assessment, or MISA. And essentially in grades 3 through 5, there's a MISA preparation component in order to better prepare students for the MISA assessment. And for MISA, essentially students are assessed on the next generation science standards and the performance expectations and the evidence statements that were all taught between grades kindergarten and 5th grade. So let's go on to the next slide. Our next slide is essentially the section on engagement and exploration. And let me explain to you what the engagement section should essentially include. So for the engagement, you should have activities that capture the student's attention, connect their thinking to the situation, and help them access their prior and current knowledge. So within the engagement, students may experience a new phenomenon or they may reflect on an anchor phenomenon. Within Prince George's County elementary science curriculum, every unit has a module phenomenon. So some units may have 3 modules or 2 modules or even 1 module, and every module has its own phenomenon. And in the engagement section, you're mentally engaging the students with an activity, a picture or video, or even a question. And the engagement activities help the students to make connections with what they know and can do. So let me provide you with a description of the exploration. In the exploration, you, the teacher, are providing students with activities that allow them to investigate the initial ideas and solutions in meaningful contexts. So students can either work independently or work with others to explore ideas through hands-on activities. So let's go ahead and look at the different activities that I have in my engagement/exploration section of this 5E lesson. So I have my Bitmoji classroom here again. I have my Bitmoji saying, let's go ahead and dive into our engagement, exploration activities. And I also provide students with a reminder, just letting them know, don't forget about the norms and expectations that we just reviewed. And then on the laptop, as you guys can see, there's a picture of a wave. Some students may recognize it and some students may not. But essentially, I would go ahead and I would use this image to engage students and ask them, what do you think this is? And they would provide me with their different responses as we have a collaborative discussion. And then I would let students know as we go throughout the lesson, you will begin to discover what that image is and be able to explore the different parts of it. And so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So the next slide is an open-ended question asking the students what they think a phenomenon is. Now, let's pause for a moment. If you can recall earlier, I told you that in Prince George's County, all science lessons are based on the next generation science standards and they're phenomenon driven. Now, I can't use a phenomenon or phenomena. So phenomena is a plural version of phenomenon within my lessons if my students don't have an understanding of what a phenomenon is. And as you guys can see, I am not assuming that the students all know what a phenomenon is. This provides me with an opportunity to explore what the students may already know about a phenomenon and to also clarify any misconceptions that they may have about a phenomenon. So the students will go ahead and type in the response here. Let's go on to the next slide. On the next slide, we're going to have a discussion on phenomenon. So essentially, I would provide the students with the definition of a phenomenon. I would let them know that we use our 5 senses to make observations on the phenomenon. And then we would launch into a discussion on, okay, so what are some phenomenon that might be based on the weather? Or I may ask them, describe a phenomenon that deals with the weather. And they may say rain, snow, hail. The answers will vary. Then I may ask them, okay, describe a phenomenon that is based on a natural hazard or a natural disaster. And they may say a forest fire or wildfire or a tsunami or a monsoon. And the answers will vary, a hurricane, a tornado. And then we'll go ahead and I'll ask students, okay, now describe a phenomenon that you would see every day. And some students might be able to say the night sky, or when the sun sets, or when the sun rises, or when the birds chirp, or when there's a puddle. And the answers will vary. Or when I go to sleep, or when I wake up, or when my mom is frying eggs on the stove. The answers will vary. And essentially the purpose is to get students comfortable with the definition of a phenomenon. I do understand that's going to take a couple of lessons. By a couple, I mean, 12 or 20. But this is the thing. The students will continuously be exposed to the definition of a phenomenon, and they will continuously see different phenomenons and engage with them in order to continue to build their understanding of a phenomenon, and in order to help them continue to explore the science and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, the cross-cutting concepts using that phenomenon. So let's go ahead and look at this open-ended question. With this open-ended question, I have students comparing and contrasting the two phenomena and mention at least one similarity and one difference. So I have this picture. And essentially, what am I looking for? I'm just trying to get a baseline understanding of where my students are when it comes to this performance expectation. I want to know, what do they already know about waves? Are they even able to make the connection between the two phenomena that they see in front of them, about how they're both examples of waves? One is an ocean wave and one involves sound waves. Wait, Angela, how does that airplane involve sound waves? Well, if students have been on an airplane, and we don't want to assume that all students have been on an airplane because some students have different backgrounds. For those students who have been on an airplane, they would be able to recall what it's like being on the airplane, what it's like when the plane is about to take off from the runway, and how loud and noisy it gets, and how that noise and loudness is due to sound waves. So if they're able to provide that explanation, awesome. If they're not able to provide that explanation, that is absolutely okay. And then, of course, as students write in their responses, they'll also engage in a collaborative discussion and sharing their responses with their classmates. Let's go on to the next slide. So in the next slide, we just explore the definition of a wave. And here, the students have an opportunity to do an interactive activity that essentially is a form of a pre-assessment. So the purpose of this activity is to, yet again, get a baseline understanding of what my students know about the performance expectation, how much of the performance expectation have they mastered, what part of the performance expectation do we still need to work on, and also just to get a general understanding of what my students already know about waves. So the students will go ahead and complete the fill in the blank. I am purposely putting wrong answers. I am fully aware. It's being done on purpose. And one thing that I love about Nearpod is that the students would get immediate feedback on how they do on the fill in the blanks or the time to climb activity, which you'll see closer to the end of this lesson. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. This is the last slide for this engagement and exploration section. And essentially, the students are going to have an opportunity to interact with a wave and the different parts of a wave. Now, for this section, what you guys may currently see, a picture of a wave. If I desire to do so, if I feel the need for it, I would also have my students go into their Science Dimensions textbook in another tab and actually manipulate the wave within their textbook. One thing I love about the Science Dimension textbook, especially the student edition, the online student edition, is that it is extremely interactive with videos, with drag and drop features, and the students are able to manipulate the textbook in so many different ways. And so that is a hands-on activity, virtual hands-on activity that I would have the students do to conclude this section. Let's go ahead and continue to go on to the next slide. So our next slide is the explanation and elaboration section. So let me provide you with a description of what is expected for the explanation section. So as the teacher, you should be providing students with activities that allow them to investigate initial ideas and solutions in meaningful contexts. So within the explanation section of your lesson, students are able to either work independently or work in groups to explore ideas through hands-on activities. And of course, under the guidance of the teacher, the students are able to clarify their own understanding of major concepts and skills. So that's for the explanation section. So let's go ahead and dive into the description for the elaboration section. So within the elaboration section, the teachers are supposed to provide activities to the students that allow them to expand and apply their understandings of the concepts within the new context and situations. So essentially, students are applying their new knowledge in new situations and context. This is an opportunity for the students to assess their own knowledge, skills, and abilities, and for teachers to evaluate the students' progress. So let's go ahead and see some of the activities within the explanation and elaboration section. Of course, like you see again, you see my Bitmoji character, and if you look, the laptop is different again. And the reason why it's different is because within this section, the students will be toggling between Google Classroom and their Nearpod lesson. So let's go ahead and see why. On this slide, you can see that the students are instructed to open up another tab. One thing that I would like to say about these lessons is that I try to make them as explicit as possible. Even if I'm over communicating or providing extra directions that some people may feel is unnecessary, it's not unnecessary for the students. And over communication is extremely important during this time of distance learning, especially since we're not with the students in person and we're with them in a virtual setting. So let's go ahead and go to Google Classroom. We're going to go ahead and go to the stream. So this is the stream. If we come to the classwork tab, you can see that there are different headings and that every assignment is numbered in a certain way. And if you would like a better understanding as to how I set up the Google Classroom and why the assignments are numbered in this specific way, you can feel free to check out the video in the description box below talking about how to set up your Google Classroom. So if we go back to the Nearpod lesson, it tells us to go to assignment number 01. The reason why these assignments are numbered is so that the students can easily identify and locate their assignments within Google Classroom. So I go under the science heading because it said number 01 science. I go under the science heading and I'm able to locate the assignment. Voila. And then I'm going to go ahead and select view assignment and instructions. So one thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that the directions in the Nearpod lesson are always going to be reiterated in some shape, form, or fashion in the directions in Google Classroom under the assignments. So for this assignment, students are told that they need to carefully watch the video about waves, and they're given the directions as to how they can access this assignment or access this video. This video is from Safari Montage, and so the students need to use their PGCPS username and password in order to access the video. Now, when I provide students with a video, I don't provide them for a video just for a video's sake. The students are always engaging in some form of an activity based on the video. So let's go ahead and click on this assignment. So when we click on this assignment, which is a Google Doc, so essentially the students are instructed to write down 5 important facts that they learned about how waves travel, the characteristics of a wave, and how waves are measured based on the video. And I provide the students with a numbered list, and I also provide students with a rubric so that they are aware of how they will be graded for this assignment. And the amazing thing, or the awesome thing about Google Classroom, is that the rubric is also within Google Classroom. And I simply took screenshots of the rubric that I created in Google Classroom, and I pasted those screenshots within the Google document assignment that you just saw. And once students are done, they're told that they need to mark that assignment as completed when they're done. And when I looked at this assignment just now, I realized I didn't put that there. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that. Alrighty. Now let's go ahead and go to the next activity. So the next activity that the students are doing within this section is that they're reading the assigned pages from their HMH Science Dimension textbook. And I provide students with different options as to how they can read these pages. They can either go into Google Classroom and find assignment number 02 and select the PDF there, or they can access their Science Dimensions textbook online through Clever. And of course, we're doing a whole lot of modeling because we're doing a whole lot of distance learning. And so I would show the students how to get to Clever, how to access their science dimensions textbooks in Clever, and we would continue practicing that so that they can utilize that option if they ever want to. And the reason why I would provide students with that option is because it's my way of also being able to differentiate. Some students are visual learners. Some students need the text read to them. And the beautiful part about the Science Dimensions textbook is that the students are able to be read to from that platform. Or the students could go to the next slide and they can read the assigned pages here because I included the PDF within the Nearpod lesson. So the next activity that students are about to do is a virtual simulation where they're going to be able to manipulate the amplitude and frequency of a wave and record their observations in their science journal. But before I allow students to dive into this virtual simulation, I make sure that they have a concrete definition of amplitude and frequency, since those are the two variables that they will be manipulating within their virtual simulation. So here are the definitions. And then within the next slide, it's the virtual simulation. So students are able to go ahead and I will provide them with an opportunity to play around with the virtual simulation for the first 2 minutes. And then I will provide students with guided questions so that they can make observations about the wave. So I may ask students, what happens when we decrease the amplitude of the wave? What do they notice about the wave? What happens when we increase the amplitude of the wave? What do they notice about the wave? What happens when we decrease the frequency of the wave? What happens when we increase the frequency of the wave? So the students would be able to provide those observations and record those observations in their science journal. Going on to the next slide. Our next slide is the evaluation slide. And let me go ahead and provide you with the description for the evaluation section. So for the evaluation, the students are going to be able to analyze their understanding of the concepts, and you, the teacher, have the opportunity to assess student learning. So the students are able to assess their own knowledge, skills, and abilities, and the teachers are able to evaluate the students' progress. So the first activity for the evaluation section is the students are instructed to draw a model of a wave and label the different components of a wave. And as you can also note, the students are given a set amount of time in order to do that. By now, the students should be comfortable and familiar with the different components of a wave based upon what they've learned from the video, the text that they read, and the hands-on virtual simulation that they did in the explanation and elaboration section of this lesson. The thing that I love about Nearpod is that students are able to draw their model and label the different parts. And this model is very simple. It's not complex in nature, and I did it on purpose because essentially the students' ability to be able to apply their knowledge, it will grow in complexity and rigor. I know what their data indicates. And so essentially, I'm starting with my students off a little bit easy. However, when we get to the next lesson, and also when they're completing their homework assignments and the independent assignment, it gets a little bit more rigorous, where the students are applying their knowledge to the different activities and assignments, as you guys will see shortly. So I drew my arrows, and one thing you'll be able to see is that you can include text. So wavelength. And that goes right here. And then the next thing is crest. And I'm going to change the color. That would go right there. The next text would be amplitude. That would go right here. And the last one would be, let me actually, okay. erase my arrow because actually, oops. And lastly, we have the trough. Let's make it red. And then I put it right there. And voila, you have a model. So let's go ahead to the next thing. The last part of the evaluation, the students are doing this activity called Time to Climb. And yes, these questions are based on the engagement and exploration section. These are actually the same questions from the fill in the blanks that the students did earlier on in this lesson. So the students will have an opportunity to answer those questions again, now armed with the information they learned from the video, the text, and the hands-on activity that they were able to do prior. The last section for the independent assignment, the students are told to go back into Google Classroom to complete a TEI, or a Tech Enhanced Item. And so I created this TEI. Shout out to Jessica Leedy. Woo-woo! She's an amazing colleague. Love her. She put me on how to create a TEI using Google Drawings. So let me show you what that quickly looks like. Assignment number 3. Click on View Assignment, Instructions, and here is the TEI. And essentially it's a drag and drop activity where the students need to fill in the blank in order to complete this explanation of this wave model. So the problem states Allison and Carlos were talking about different properties of waves. Allison was having a bit of difficulty understanding what was happening with the waves in the picture to the right. Directions. Help Allison choose the correct words to complete the sentences. Drag and drop the words to fill in the blank. This TEI can be used across all content areas. So you can create one for reading, you can create one for math, you can create one for social studies. You can also use it in middle school and in high school. So I love TEIs. And of course, there will be a video talking more about TEIs later on down the line. So students will also be provided with a rubric so they know how they will get graded on this TEI. Alrighty, let's go back into the Nearpod lesson. And the last section is the homework. So the students will be provided with when the assignment is due. They'll be provided with a reminder to submit their assignments on time. And don't forget, always bring your best and then some. So the students are presented with their homework assignments. Now, it looks like they have 2 homework assignments, but they actually, in reality, only have 1 homework assignment. This Newsella article is just the informational text that they're going to be reading. And usually Newsella articles have comprehension questions associated with them, but this article did not have questions associated with it. So I created a Google form with comprehension questions based on the article. So if we come back to Google Classroom, select classwork, and because it's a homework assignment, I'm going to scroll down to homework, and assignment number 04 is the article, number 05 is the Google form, and I just want to quickly show you what it looks like. Essentially, I created a Google form with their comprehension questions. Yes, it is multiple choice and true and false, but it's not as simple as it looks. So the students would have to carefully analyze the text in order to properly answer these questions. So that concludes my 5E lesson. And the last thing I want to say is, yes, I do have a thanks slide, and I do provide students the option of emailing me or leaving a comment in Google Classroom if they have any questions. And lastly, I do leave these credits. If you notice the slide template, you might be thinking, wow, Angela, these slides look really awesome and amazing. Why, thank you. I can't take any credit though. The slide template comes from Slides Go, which is an amazing site. If you are not hip to Slides Go, now you are. You want to have a bookmark for Slides Go because essentially they have numerous presentation templates that you can choose from that are creative, that look eye-catching, neat, and presentable, and I really love their templates. So this is where my template came from. If you found this video helpful, please like this video. Please leave a comment. If there's anything that you would like for me to elaborate on, please drop your question in the comment section. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I hope you have an amazing and blessed day.